Hello everyone, and thank you again for joining me on what it will be a review for only one episode, which is Season 1, Episode 8 of Star Trek the Original Series. This episode's name is What Are Little Girls Made Of? So, to begin with, I thought it was a very interesting title, so I really didn't know what to expect. Now, in terms of how entertaining this episode was, I have to say it was a bit flatter than all the other episodes, and yet I actually did enjoy this one very much because it does refer to certain subjects that I found very interesting in different TV programs and movie that I will refer to in a few minutes. So let's make a very quick recap of what happened in this episode. To begin with, this episode includes not only Kirk, but in this case it will be Nurse Chapel. So I already met Nurse Chapel in a previous episode where I definitely hated that wig she was wearing. In this case, this wig looks a lot better in my opinion. I think the color is not that gray. It has a very nice platinum blonde. I think she looks beautiful as a blonde, so I will keep it that way. So we learned that she gave up a career in bio something because she's looking for her fiancé that has been gone missing for 5 years, and decided to enter a ship as a crew member so that she can find her fiancé, Dr. Corby. They found the planet of where Dr. Corby will be, and apparently this is like an ice planet where temperatures will drop about 110 degrees Celsius below zero. So we understand this is a very cold place, so after establishing contact with the people in the planet, we learn that Dr. Corby is actually alive. They decide to bring down Kirk and Nurse Chapel into this very, very cold planet. And then we meet this Nosferatu on steroids named Rock. And Rock loves to wear this really nice cape and has a very gifted larynx. So after this very emotional reunion between Dr. Corby and Nurse Chapel, we learn that Dr. Brown, who is Dr. Corby's assistant, is actually a robot. We also meet this adorable dolly girl named Andrea. And she is incredibly kind. She is very, very polite to both Kirk and Christine, but you still think there's something going on. So after we discover that Dr. Brown is actually a robot, now we understand that Kirk and Nurse Chapel are in danger. Dr. Corby tries to persuade Kirk to not report anything until he learns what are these great discoveries that Dr. Corby has made. So the plan is basically this. He is creating duplicates of every single person, and he transfers their consciousness into each body. This is in order to make people live forever. Better, stronger, faster bodies in a better mind. And by making it better, they take every single emotion out. So Dr. Corby believes that it's better to take all the emotions out of the person to have a better society. So in order to prove how good these things could be, he takes Kirk and creates a duplicate of Kirk. Because, having two Kirks the way that we had the Enemy Within was not enough. So we now have another duplicate. So they bring this green mannequin, put him in a table, spin it around, and have a duplicate. One of the things that I really like was this cool switch as this table is spinning, so we can see, well, we don't really see the transformation, but now we can see there are two Kirks lying on the same table. Kirk and Dr. Corby have this very interesting conversation while having dinner. And I have to admit, these two guys in the back have the worst peripheral vision ever. Kirk understands that even though these people actually are robots, their consciousness were human. Or, I don't know, organic would be the name. So he does what every single logical man would do. Make out with a female robot. So he kisses Andrea, And what he makes is actually making Andrea upset. Even though Dr. Corby has just claimed that there are no emotions going on in these robots, we can see that they actually do have emotions and a pretty deep memory. And then this Kirk's duplicate manages to infiltrate the Enterprise, and after having a very rude interchange with Spock where he calls him a half-breed, Spock is more than intelligent, and he understands that's not Kirk. At the end we learn that Dr. Corby was also another android. One of the things that I really like about this episode, these tiny details that happen around. For example, these two guys going all smiley and happy when they listen to Christine talking to Dr. Corby. And then we see Lieutenant Uhura giving this really nice hug because we see Christine going all glowy and happy because she's going to see Dr. Corby again. I love the designs of the inside of the caves, even though we can see that it's just paint and plaster all around. I really like the whole idea of being inside of the planet, that it's warm and it's habitable for the people in there. I kind of like Andrea's costume. I mean, if I had her body, I wouldn't be wearing it anyway, but I think it looked pretty good on her. At first, Dr. Corby is quite convincing. I was actually buying the whole idea that this experiment was something good, but then, oh man, he's not even real. And of course, the big hero of this episode is again Mr. Spock. He is way too intelligent, but then again, if Kirk had a duplicate calling Spock half-breed, that really doesn't speak that well of Kirk, the original one at least. I loved Christine Chapel's answer to Mr. Spock when she asked, "Have you ever been engaged?" Even Kirk's face was like, "Oh man." And then Spock has a very nice reaction. I had to say, I laughed out loud that one. I think Christine's character has developed a lot here. I really enjoyed how she is very educated and very polite, but at the same time, she's not going to take shit from anyone. Even though I think she could have done a lot more in this episode, and instead of instructing Rook to not hurt Kirk, why didn't she ask him to help him escape? And finally, we see Christine Chapel going heartbroken, and that's terrible. She had this tiny hope of having Dr. Corby back in her life. She had this really amazing reunion, only to learn that the man that she just kissed turned out to be plastic. And not only that, it was evil plastic. And then she ends up staying in the ship. She didn't have any reason to stay, but then she has no purpose. She's gonna stay in the ship. I would do the same. And probably the worst thing about this whole episode is, where is Scotty? So, this is just a recap, but what do we really get to see in this episode? This episode touches a lot of subjects that I personally am very interested in. It's mostly about consciousness being able to be transferred into a synthetic body. I remember I got this kind of a phase where I was really wondering about what if your consciousness was transferred to a synthetic body. And this happened when Chappie was on cinemas. And I think I saw Chappie first, and then I saw the new version of RoboCop. These two stories have this idea of having a consciousness in a synthetic body. Even though maybe RoboCop is not exactly a consciousness by itself, it is, in my opinion, because if you remember, there's only the brain, the face, the lungs, the heart, and just a hand. Everything else is not his body. And you can see there's a little bit of drama going there because he can't accept himself not being with the same body that he was born with. The same idea happens there in Chappie. Chappie copies his mom's consciousness, and after she dies, they decide to transfer this consciousness into another robot body. And let's not forget about the inventor, the scientific guy. In order to save his life, they transfer his consciousness into another body similar to that of Chappie so they can run away. There are many other ideas that come to mind when watching this episode. Black Mirror has an episode that you probably heard about. It's called Rachel, Jack, and Ashley 2 that touches this very same subject. But that's the worst episode, so I'm not going to talk about that one. I'm going to speak about Black Museum, especially in the second and the third story, where this woman's consciousness is transferred into a teddy bear and has only two emotions to manifest. And we also have this inmate's consciousness that is being cloned over and over with endless pain. But I don't think anyone has really gone deeper into this consciousness into a synthetic body as Westworld did in the second season. In Westworld, we learned that James Dallas is trying to find a way to live forever, and that's why they have this very secret project that we couldn't learn about in the first season. And what happens to James Dallas is that his synthetic body is rejecting his human consciousness. We also learn that William is probably going through the same process in the very end, even though the third season really doesn't speak much about what has been happening to him, and we just kind of think that it's himself losing his mind. We do know that he's been struggling with knowing whether he's real or a host during the entire second season. The only way that they kind of do this successfully is by creating Bernard. But Bernard is not a consciousness being transferred from a body to another. Bernard was created by Ford, so he's actually an artificial mind that is created based on Ford's memories and has been verified by Dolores' memory. But in the end, he's just a new personality going there. This is not the same as using artificial intelligence. That's why in the case of Westworld, James Dallas' character is more important in this specific subject than Bernard's. I do understand that this episode wasn't really going to dwell deep into this whole aspects of consciousness being transferred to a different body, but I think that it opens the door to a lot of questions and a lot of possibilities and a lot of other stories that we can create from there. For example, I do remember in RoboCop that his wife loves him, his son loves him, but he doesn't accept himself as it is. So if I'd ask you, would you still love the person if he was not using the same body? You probably would say, yes, I'm in love with the person that he is and I'm not in love with his body. But then again, that person is not okay with not being in his body. He cannot accept himself. At least that's what happens in RoboCop. So when I watched Chappie, I was thinking about, would his mom be okay to be brought back to life because she knows that she's dead? Would you be okay if that's the only resource you have if you were about to die? Being brought back in a body that is not yours? In the case of Star Trek, the android accepts himself and he is superior, even though the entire episode Dr. Corby keeps saying that they are exact duplicates, but that's not entirely true. Duplicate understands that he's an android, that he doesn't need to eat, he doesn't feel hunger, he doesn't feel emotions, so obviously they're not the same as the original person. I think the idea of transferring or cloning consciousness is way deeper, and I think that if it ever happened in reality, I think I'm still on the fiction area and not science. I think that it's really interesting to explore these new subjects from the very human point of view. Is that what you would want? If that was the only way to save your life, would you actually do it? And especially knowing that you're probably going to be living in this new body for many more years than you would if you were in your original body. Would it be easy for you to enter a relationship even though it's not the same anymore? Even though there are many TV shows that nowadays have been exploring this possibility, what I do admire is that Star Trek did this 50 years ago. Even though you didn't really go deep into it, the whole idea of creating a duplicate of yourself in a much better enhanced body is quite interesting. Even though I think people back in the day would think that was just impossible, I think that nowadays people are starting to see this more into the science area rather than in the fiction. I hope it's still in the fiction, to be honest. So I have to place this question on the table. If you were in a life or death situation, would you prefer to have your consciousness transferred into another synthetic body, or would you just accept your fate and die? Food for thought. Another interesting subject here is this God complex and how a human with a God complex is doomed to self-destruct. It could be one person, it could be a whole society thinking themselves as gods, but at the end, they never survive. Apparently, this is the whole circle of history repeating itself. At least in this episode, it happened, where Rock remembered the story of his planet and just realized that Dr. Corby is about to do the exact same thing they went through. Well, that's it for this first episode. I know that this is a much shorter episode, but considering that I had so many references in this one, I thought it would take me forever to dig out every single piece of video that I have to bring here into the edition room. I already watched Miri and I already watched Dagger of the Mind, and I will be discussing them in my next video. Thank you again for joining me. God bless and see you the next time. Bye bye.